Microplastics in food. Are we really eating one credit card per week? In 2019, Australian researchers published a paper claiming we each unintentionally consume around 5 grams of plastic each week. That's the same as eating a credit card. How? By eating foods that contain microplastics. Wow. The research has since been unpacked and disputed. More on that later. But first, what are microplastics exactly? Microplastics are pieces of plastic that are smaller than 5 millimeters. That's 3/16 of an inch. Microplastics form when objects made from plastic are damaged or degraded, or they're formed that way deliberately, as with the tiny abrasive beads which were used in washing powders, facial cleansers and toothpaste until being phased out in most countries. How do plastics turn into microplastics? Plastic items like food packaging, clothing made from synthetic fibres, and building materials can break down and degrade into microplastics through mechanical means. For example, one fleece jacket can shed 250,000 plastic fibres during one wash cycle, and by chemical degradation such as by breaking down in sunlight. Some microorganisms can also contribute to the degradation of plastics. Microplastics end up in human food through various pathways. They can be taken into the bodies of the plants and animals we eat. They're present in the water we drink, and they can contaminate our foods during processing and from the food's packaging during transport and storage. I recently attended a fascinating talk, which I'll refer to as Reichman 2023, where the presenter shared some interesting new knowledge we've gained about microplastics in food. For example, she explained that a microplastic particle commonly found in milk is a blue fibre made of polyethersulfone and or polysulfone, and this blue material is used for filters in milk processing operations. Other unexpected pathways for microplastic contamination of food include butchers chopping meat on plastic boards, fibres or fragments of plastics from tea bags, polystyrene particles from meat trays and takeaway containers, and particles from bottled water containers and their lids. Are biodegradable and recycled plastics extra risky? There are almost no studies on microplastic generation from biodegradable plastics or recycled plastics, said Reichman. However, we do know that some biodegradable plastics were deliberately designed to break down into microplastics quickly, so some microplastics are the direct result of biodegradable plastics. Experts also suspect that the processes used for recycling plastics are capable of concentrating contaminants such as heavy metals in the recycled products. However, that has not yet been investigated. Do we really put microplastics in soil on purpose? Microplastics have been extensively studied in oceans, but few studies address their presence on land. In soil, microplastics can be present by accident, for example from the breakdown of irrigation hoses or deposition from the atmosphere. Microplastics are also deliberately added to soils through the use of plastic mulches for water conservation and plastic coatings which are applied to fertilizers and seeds. The coatings are used to provide slow-release characteristics for fertilizers and to extend the life of seeds. How much is present in food? Microplastics have been found in every food that has been surveyed, says Reichman. The concentration of microplastics in foods is hugely variable across different food types and within the same foods. For example, there are large variations between the amount of microplastic in different parts of the same fish. Fillets or mussel tend to have fewer microplastics, while whole fish have more. Filtered feeders such as shellfish contain more microplastics than other types of seafood, and that is from Dawson et al. 2021. In samples of table salt, the variation is notable. Researchers have found less than 1 particle per kilogram in some samples and 2,500 particles per kilogram in others. The type of plastic is also highly variable. In salt, researchers found polypropylene, polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, and others. Do microplastics harm us? Because microplastics are incredibly diverse in their shape and materials of composition, it's impossible to generalize about their effects on us. For example, polyvinyl chloride is relatively more toxic than polypropylene. Some plastic materials contain additives such as BPA and phthalates, while others don't, and some microplastic particles have larger surface areas or sharper shapes, rendering them potentially more harmful than others. We can inhale microplastics from carpets, clothes, and furniture upholstery, but the main sources of human exposure are food and water. Lee et al. 2023 suggests microplastics cause inflammatory responses, interfere with our immune system, cause oxidative stress injury, and affect the gastrointestinal tract. There's a range of possible modes of action when it comes to harm from microplastics, including physical damage to our internal structures, gut and lungs, from large particles and fibres, as well as the toxicity of the plastics themselves or toxic effects from other environmental chemicals which are absorbed onto microplastics and released into our bodies when the particles are ingested. Challenges with measurements. Measuring microplastics in food, water, and the environment is a difficult task. It's physically challenging to separate plastic particles from carbon-based materials like food and blood without damaging them. Smaller particles are thought to be more toxic than larger particles, but measuring smaller particles is more technically difficult, and the methods are more labour-intensive compared to measuring larger particles. For smaller particles, analytical methods such as TEDGCMS are used, which can cost more than $1,000 per sample. This makes surveys and monitoring prohibitively expensive. A further challenge is that many animal toxicity studies have been done with spherical-shaped microplastics which are newly manufactured. These, however, are not representative of microplastics found in natural environments, which are more commonly fibre-shaped and composed of weathered or older polymers. This means that animal toxicity tests could be significantly underestimating the risk of harm. So how much are we really eating? When researchers reviewed the human intake literature in 2023, they found just 4 previous studies had attempted to estimate how much microplastic is in our diets. The researchers who suggested 5 grams per week used just 4 food types to estimate intake: drinking water, shellfish, salt, and beer. They also noted the extreme challenges with both measurement of particles in foods and extrapolation to populations. A review of those estimates suggested they were probably too high, but noted that we only have data for a very few food types and that the reliability of the data is questionable because there's no validated method available. The ultimate conclusion: we just don't yet have enough data to properly assess the human intake of microplastics and therefore can't make an estimation of the food safety risk. And the main source for that story was Let's Talk About Microplastics in Food, a presentation by Professor Susie Reichman from the University of Melbourne and hosted by the Australian Institute of Food Science and Technology. And there are a bunch of other sources which are listed in the email and the post.